All right, g'day and welcome to our wrap up of the Specialized Kenevo SL. This is a bike, as you can see, it's filthy. Blake has spent hours and hours and months riding this thing. I know he absolutely loves it. But before we get too much into how the bike performs, I just want to go ahead and address the elephant in the room. When we did the first impressions of this bike, I had a bit of a gaffe. I mistakenly said the motor was a Brose. The comment section lit up, our emails lit up. The good thing about that is obviously a lot of people are paying attention. Now, it's not a Brose motor that you'll find on the Levos. This is a motor that Specialized developed themselves. It's called the Specialized SL 1.1. And let's pitch the questions to Blake here now. I know he's ridden previous generation Kenevo, you've ridden a bunch of Levos. How does the Specialized motor compare to the Brose that you're going to find on some other Specialized?
Yeah, so the SL 1.1 motor is a unicorn. Not only is it obviously super light, going along with the SL denotation, but the way that it delivers the power, coupled with the lighter weight battery, is out of this world. It's not like anything else you're going to experience, not only from Specialized, but any other e-bike brand or motor battery manufacturers. As JT mentioned, like silky smooth and so damn quiet, like it's not even funny.
Wicked. Let's step away from the e-bike side for a second and just have a bit of an overview. So obviously the SL stands for super light. Blake will get in touch on that a bit more later. But yeah, 2.9 wheel exclusive on this thing, doesn't have a mullet setup. 170mm of travel, front and rear. And so much adjustability, probably the most adjustability of any bike we've ever had here on review. Blake, give us a bit of an overview, mate, when you got this bike and you started setting it up, some of the mods and some of the adjustments and whatnot. Yeah, tell us a bit about that process.
Absolutely. So about 12 months before we got this bike, we were on the new Specialized Stump Jumper Evo, which uses the same adjustment systems. So it's got 3 different head tube settings. So you've got like obviously steep, mid or slack. That's also going to affect your bottom bracket height while you're making those adjustments, which is a super simple 5-minute swap out of the cup. They've also got the high and the low bottom bracket setting on the rear axle as well, near the horse link there. So between those different options, you've got more adjustment than you can poke a stick at, and we haven't seen anything like this really on an e-bike. Normally it's like set and forget from the e-bike standards. But Specialized have obviously developed this with the Stump Jumper Evo and carried it across perfectly. Like it works perfectly. There's not a lot of worrying about is the headset going to come loose because of these cups or anything like that. Like absolutely not. So yeah, and then as JT mentioned, like 29 exclusive. It's not the be all and end all because it is a little bit of a longer bike. Like a little bit longer rear end than some of the other 29ers. Even me, myself, as we know, I'm a short ass. I haven't been buzzing my ass on the back end as much as I would on a regular bike where they're trying to make it as short as possible. Because we've got the motor in there, they're having to make it a little bit longer, and that's been a positive if anything.
Let's talk a little bit about the Geo and how it performs. I've seen you riding this bike a lot. You've been throwing it around. Quite aggressive still. Is it very lively on the trail, or is it more of a long straight plower? It
is actually surprisingly lively, considering obviously it's 170mm travel, like it's a big boy, and coupled with there is a little bit of extra weight there, obviously because of the motor and the battery over, say, the Stump Jumper SL or the flat out Enduro, but because all the weight's so low down, it's not affecting any of the maneuverability up high on the bike when you're trying to really play around and flick it. But that weight also comes into its own when you want to stay planted, hold a fast line and things like that. So it's sort of the best of both worlds.
Mate, is it pretty confidence inspiring, this thing? I know when we did that road trip a couple of weeks ago, you hit a jump on this thing that was insane. Was it 30, 40 feet?
Yeah, I think we went pretty deep.
So yeah, how hard can you push this bike? Like 170mm travel, that's really high in the Enduro. So as we're almost in downhill territory there. How hard can you push this bike? Is it pretty aggressive?
It's as confidence inspiring as anything I've ridden, basically, like e-bike or regular bike. As I said, like that extra weight being so low down, the bike feels so super stable at high speeds, which is crazy. Like it almost has a downhill bike feel from that aspect, because it's just it just wants to plow. Like you point this thing and it'll just go in a straight direction. Like it doesn't really matter what's going on underneath it. But at the same time, it's nimble enough to be able to get yourself out of trouble. Like I've had a few instances on a few of the full fat e-bikes where because you've got to try and change the direction of so much more weight. It's like riding downhill bikes from, you know, when I started back in the early 2000s and that kind of thing. Whereas this is like, again, like, it sounds a bit cliche, but the best of both worlds from that aspect.
Awesome. Let's dig into the e-bike side of this a little bit now. One of the things about the SL, obviously we've talked about it, it's super, super light. Now the way they achieve that is they've basically got a smaller motor and a smaller battery. Now, battery you're going to find on this that comes stock internally is 320 watt hour. And then the power output of the motor is around half, a little less than half of what you'd find on, I guess, a traditional e-bike. Now, the easiest way to explain the difference in power, as Blake sort of has mentioned to me, is this thing in turbo mode. So there's 3 modes, Eco, Trail, Turbo. This thing in turbo is pretty much the same as a regular e-bike in trail mode. So it gives you double the assistance rather than triple. But yeah, Blake, I'm curious, how does that kind of little less power actually feel on the trail? Do you have to put more input yourself, or do you even notice it?
You don't really notice it, to be honest, because of the weight of the bike. Like, you're sort of compromised on power, yes, but you're also saving a lot of weight between, obviously, you know, you're putting yourself on top of the bike. That weight's not going to change whether you're riding a Kenevo or a Kenevo SL, but you take away 5 to 6 kilos worth of the bike. Like, we're talking 20% worth of the bike's weight there. So in a roundabout way, it doesn't really make that much difference on the trail. Having said that, I'll happily ride this thing in eco, whereas you won't catch me riding a normal bike in eco unless I'm, you know, trying to save a little bit of battery towards the end of the ride. But I'll happily ride this thing in eco and you know, get the lungs burning a little bit more. I've done probably like a 35 kilometer ride with the thing turned off as well, just for interest's sake. And happy as Larry, like it weighs, I think it's about 800 grams heavier than my normal enduro bike.
Wow.
So put it that way.
That's an interesting, so when the bike's turned off, or when you hit that 25 kilometer limit where the assistance cuts out, a lot of e-bikes, you really, boom, it hits home. This is a lot of bike.
Yeah.
It's quite sort of sluggish and feels quite heavy and quite mechanical to pedal. How does this thing feel when it's turned off, or when you eclipse that 25 Ks? Is it a slap in the face?
It's nowhere near as much as what you might be expecting.
Oh, yeah.
And again, once you've gone over that sort of 25, or the bike's turned off completely, and you're freewheeling, there's no resistance from the motor at all. Because of that belt drive, it just basically disconnects. Other motor manufacturers are catching up to that, but I don't think that any of them come close to the Specialized or the Brose motor for that matter.
It's really interesting. Now, I know that the 320 watt hour battery we touched on before, you can of course get an extender which essentially sits in the water bottle. It adds another 160 watt hours. But this thing, you haven't had to use that. Now, the 320 watt hour scares a lot of people away because they think in a regular bike they've got maybe a 600 watt hour or even a 900, and you rip through 300 watts in like half hour of turbo. But because this thing's using less power output, does that mean the battery actually drains around the same time as an e-bike when you're pedaling out? Like, are you draining this thing every ride, or how's it go on the trail?
So between me and a mate who has a YT decoy, which I believe is about a 650 watt hour, we went out for a ride, blasted downhill runs, and we're climbing back up the fire road. We were done. Like, our legs and lungs were done. We kept pushing the bikes until we ran the batteries dry, and we literally ran out both bikes within about 2 or 3 kilometers of each other.
Wow.
So to put it into perspective, like, it's very, very comparable. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, now one of the things about the Specialized Kenevo SL and the Levo SL, or pretty much all Specialized e-bikes, they've got a lot of adjustability in terms of the programming. You can set a lot of things. You can really dig deep and kind of geek out. Now, they use the Mission Control app. That's the same as the rest of the Levo family, which is a super sophisticated. It's in its about 5th different version at the moment. And then on the top here, you'll see this LCD screen. This is called the Mastermind TCU. Super impressive. It basically gives it of all the information about the bike. And then you've got the little on the bar mount, which scrolls between the power modes, and also it's got the warp mode. Blake, what's it like kind of getting used to this bike and setting it up and being able to customize on some of those? What's it like to live with?
So the whole Specialized as a system is really intuitive and very, very easy to navigate through. I myself am not the most technologically advanced human being, but I can still get my way through the app pretty well, figure out settings, have a play around. I haven't had any issues with anything at all, but I could imagine that if you were to have a little bit of an issue, something going on, you'd be able to navigate your way through it pretty easily. And yeah, basically super intuitive. I've never really wanted to do anything on the fly, like out on a ride that I couldn't do on the mission control TCU. But like I said, like that app, it connects every time. Like you're not sitting there fiddling about, going, you know, getting frustrated and stuff like that, which is the last thing you want to do when you're on the bike. You know what I mean? Like there is a little bit of resistance still with, you know, the whole technology bike sort of everything coming together. But I think it's, you know, it's the way that everything's going to go eventually. But Specialized have done really, really well from the onset to make a really easily adaptive full system. Yeah.
Wicked. Now, I guess people that are thinking an e-bike light, or, you know, basically half the power, half the battery, versus maybe they're looking at getting a regular e-bike. What would you sort of say to those people and what they can expect from a Kenevo SL versus, you know, Kenevo Levo? And what kind of rider do you think would really suit this bike and just get the most out and love it?
I think a more active rider will get more out of the Kenevo and the Levo SL. And when I say active rider, you know, there's obviously horses for courses. It depends where you do a lot of your riding. If you're just lapping downhill laps all day long, climbing up 1,000 meters vert a day, probably, unless you're an already relatively fit person, you're probably not going to get the most out of the Levo. If you're riding this thing in turbo all the time, bombing up hills, you are going to drain that battery quicker than, you know, somebody who still wants to, you know, pump the lungs, pump the legs and that sort of thing. That's where you may sort of lean towards a, you know, a full fat, so to speak, e-bike. But if you still want to have a bike that you can have all the aspects of a regular enduro bike, then by all means go the Kenevo SL, because it really does feel like a regular enduro bike. Like I'm still blown away every ride now as to how similar it feels to, yeah, a non-e-bike enduro bike. Like, wow. It's crazy.
It really bridges that gap, eh?
Exactly, yeah.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. That's our wrap-up review of the Kenevo SL. As we said before, make sure you subscribe to our channel to check out heaps more videos. Add a comment below if there's anything you'd like to know that we haven't listed yet. Give us a thumbs up on this one. Blake, thanks a bunch, mate. It's time to send this one back and rip into the next one.
Easy. Thanks, boys.